As Dune captivates global audiences, it is now finally time to give Indigenous credit where it's due. I'm Yoon Kim, and this is MTV News Need to Know. The blockbuster Dune, starring Timothée Chalamet and Zendaya, is resonating with audiences, with its polluted world that feels close to our reality. The intergalactic epic sees families warring over ownership of a dangerous desert planet and its precious resources. But perhaps lesser known is how Indigenous people inspired the story. And as Native Peoples Heritage Month begins, it's time to give credit where it's due. Author Frank Herbert, who wrote the novel that was released in 1965, foresaw many of our planet's issues by listening to Indigenous environmentalists. As a young man, he was taken in by a Ho man in Washington state, believed to be the writer Henry Martin. He lived on a reservation, and during this time, Indigenous environmentalists alerted him to how much damage industrialism had wrought. They warned him that it could become planetary in scope, a warning that he passed on in his influential novel Dune. While Herbert used what he learned from Indigenous communities to talk about human actions ravaging the planet, it is nonetheless told by a white author and centers on white characters. Both film adaptations, this one by Denis Villeneuve and a 1984 version by David Lynch, were helmed by white directors. And while race isn't specifically called out, journalist Julian Brave Noisecat tweeted, "It's taken far too long for scholars in dominant colonial society to recognize that a great deal of the environmental imaginary, both apocalyptic visions and utopian alternatives, come from First Peoples." And we're not just failing to credit Indigenous people in art. Hollywood has often perpetuated harmful stereotypes like references to native burial sites in many famous horror movies. As politician Gabriela Cesares Kelly tweeted, "Anti-native culture is so ingrained in American culture that you probably didn't notice it in The Shining." They explicitly say the hotel is built on an old Indian burial ground, which perpetuates the idea that natives are dangerous, even in death. This trope and others have appeared in mainstream films for years, but a new crop of Indigenous voices in TV and film are fighting to regain control of their own stories. Take the Hulu series Reservation Dogs. It follows the ups and downs in the lives of kids growing up on a reservation, gaining popularity for its unique blend of the dramedy and heist genres, as well as authentic characters that many have never seen before. Co-creator and Academy Award winner Taika Waititi told Deadline, "There's so much humor in our communities, so many jokes. All white people want to do is see us riding whales, talking to the trees, playing flutes on mountaintops, and talking to ghosts and learning something from our grandmother. To subvert expectations is such a powerful thing." Waititi is part of a wave of young Indigenous artists getting in front of and behind the camera, using the opportunity to highlight positive and relatable aspects of Indigenous culture. There's also important incubators like the Sundance Institute's Indigenous program, which nurtures talent by providing fellowship and career opportunities to aspiring artists. Filmmaker and environmentalist Tracy Rector believes on-screen representation helps lay the groundwork for advancing positive change elsewhere. Indigenous storytelling links a millennium of knowledge with current-day life. It is integral not only to Indigenous family life today, generational healing and future growth, but also to climate justice that benefits all we share this earth with, Indigenous and otherwise. Part of the reason we're finally starting to hear these voices in the mainstream could be relative stability. This is the generation that's finally grown up without the child separation policies that tore Indigenous families apart until 1978. And while the community faces poverty, violence against women, and political oppression, increased awareness of anti-racism work could pave the way for more Indigenous representation in roles long held by white people. It's telling that by listening to Indigenous voices, Dune essentially predicted the climate crisis. And yet we're still a ways away from true narrative sovereignty. Because if more Indigenous people can continue to tell their own stories, this will not only broaden representation, but also all of our minds to the cultural richness and wisdom that we're missing out on otherwise. I'm Yoon Kim, and that's what you need to know.